So as we begin, I would like to begin first by appreciating that the gaming sector has been rapidly changing. The technologies in there also are evolving with time and sometimes quite rapidly. So the questions we want your contribution towards is, with this evolving, the rapidly evolving ecosystem, technologies are becoming increasingly high frequent, and microtransactions are called across multiple jurisdictions are also increasing so much. So how are you adapting to these changes, and what challenges do you anticipate as gaming becomes, of course, more complex with time? So I'll begin with you, gentlemen.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for having me here. Very interesting point that you are making. And I think from a regulatory point of view, I must state this, that, it's not a new thing. Even from the old regulatory framework that we used to have, we used to refer to things such as your hopper, such as, because that's the technology we knew then. But now there's new technologies, there's new terms, there's new themes that are coming up. So what we've done, for example, as Eastern Cape Gambling Board, in terms of amending our laws, we are no longer making reference to a particular item, but we're talking about something of value, because it can be anything. But I think in the main, like I said yesterday, that we've got FISCA in South Africa that regulate your virtual assets, but you've got South African Revenue Services that is not declared your cryptocurrencies as a contingency that can be utilized. So I think we've got to make sure that there's a synergy in terms of the regulatory institutions that we have in the country. But the technology is here, it's not going to change. So our regulatory framework must not necessarily respond, but must actually enable or create an environment that is enabling the operations and the innovation, but responsibly and ethically. Thank you.
Yeah, so I would like to preface my answer with South Africa is a very different financial infrastructure from the rest of the continent. The kind of payment channels and payment technologies that exist in South Africa are largely irrelevant for the betting industry outside the continent. So I actually think that the technologies haven't changed that much for the vast majority of the operators' customers and the customers that the regulators are trying to protect. It is, from our experience on the continent, in the 20 countries that we operate, exclusively mobile money. There is really no other technology that's used for betting than mobile money. It is the vast majority of betting transactions that happen with mobile money. And that technology at its core hasn't changed. And that technology at its core, I don't think is going to change in the foreseeable future, which is not necessarily a bad thing. The mobile money technology was years ahead and was already groundbreaking technology when it came out. So it's not a bad thing that it's not going to change anymore. But just for the purposes of the changing payments landscape, for 99% of betting customers on the continent, it's mobile money, and that's how it's going to stay.
Yeah, so I'll also comment on that. So I'm with him on the same. So there's new technologies, yes, but the SOPs and the way of doing things still remains the same. And what challenges we see, especially in the field we operate in, we see stuff like stable coins, blockchain, all these other technologies coming into play to obviously support the existing technology. But then regulations are not catching up with that. So that's the key challenge that I can say we've had to put up with. But then there's always ways around that, and also to make sure that you mitigate those sort of risks. Yeah.
Thank you very much. My name is Apollo. I run BitLipa. What we basically do is cross-border payment and settlement for businesses. And as you say, the landscape is really changing so much. I've been in the business for 5 years, and what we were doing 5 years ago is not what we're doing today. Key to adaptation for me is building technology that can actually adapt itself. So we have an API that connects to banks. We have an API that connects to mobile money, and our API also connects to blockchain stablecoins. It means that we're able to serve just about any client. Classic e-commerce, transport and logistics. And how do you do that? You do that by partnering with just about everybody. We are not going to offer all of the services in the payment sector. And there are people who've just focused on different kind of niches. So depending on the client that we have, we're able to direct them and route them to a channel that really fits their needs. And just as we continue building the company, we're just going to continue making our API more robust and able to just work with just about any new or even old payment platform that is upcoming. Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, it's an honor to share stage with big minds and big people in the industry. Thank you, Velex, for affording us this opportunity. Secondly, I think my colleague and I are disadvantaged to speak after everyone else. But yeah, we hope we rise to the occasion. In terms of adaptation to rising technology demands and the changes, I'll agree with my colleagues that there hasn't been that much of a change in terms of the last mile connectivity for mobile money, which is primarily the technology that most of us are working with. However, to adapt with the high volumes of transactions and the robustness of the gaming industry, what most of us have done, we've gone to smart switching platforms, which basically detect what your high volume areas are, and they try and queue your payments in order for you to process them quicker. Also, most of us are moving to cloud-based platforms. That way, your interaction between your main engine and your processing and the traffic that you're processing basically is mitigated, and you have very little latency time between the transaction and when you're processed and clearing it.
Hi. Oh, thank you for inviting me. I'm very happy to participate in this panel. So I will try to enlarge a bit the picture we are talking. For me, the big challenge is not only in payment, but also in gaming in general, is artificial intelligence, is AI. Because we are reaching, now is good, it's fun, is very helpful, but we'll be very soon in the point of no return. There is no panic button at all. Instead, we do something like, for example, regulation, but not in consumer side, in the production side of the models, no? Because today, these reinforcement models are supervised by other AIs. There is no human supervision yet at all, no? So, and this is, could be dangerous. And so one of the solutions is not only have this learning in terms of performance of knowledge, but also in ethical rules for preserve humanity, no? And obviously the other solution will be a moratorium, like it's happening in genetics with human being experimentation, because in the models they are working now in labs, so now is achieving the IQ, for example, of Einstein, 119 to 100, but in few months will be reach 1,000 IQ. So nobody of us is capable to communicate with an intelligence that is 10 times or more than us. So we are like books for them. So we need to do something about it.
All right. All right. Thank you very much, Rice. Rice is a consultant. He has been advising a lot of markets on the rising technologies and how people to adapt their businesses to adapt to those things that are rising. That's why he's here. He has to talk because he has been here for some time now. That's why he's amazed by artificial intelligence and how fast it's growing. he cannot believe just how businesses are going to quickly maybe adapt to them. It's a very interesting observation, Mr. Rice. Well, as you've spoken generally, it means your understanding of the ecosystem is that the core procedures of doing things in payments in relation to gaming has remained constant over time. So what you're doing, you're just opening up scopes to other ideas and building on to new thoughts in the market. So the question I have is now regarding to regulations. Is there anything that has stifled your growth in terms of how regulators are thinking about payments and gaming? Is there at any point you think regulations have stopped you from maybe developing more on your technologies or adopting new strategies to build your markets? I would start by Mr. Angwenyi, because Mr. Angwenyi escaped Africa and registered his business in the United Kingdom. Maybe you might
Yes.
add a little more on that.
So in terms of regulation, actually, I don't think regulation has really hampered our growth in any way. You just need to have some sort of strategy around regulation, right? So we knew that getting licenses in Africa will take forever because there's a lot of processes involved around getting a license in Africa, right? So we decided to opt for a US money transmitter license and then obviously get letters of no objection from different central banks, which are quite, work for us in different ways. Those approvals are really good, and also they can be equated to licenses, right? So we took that approach. That doesn't mean we won't look for individual African licenses, but then the no objections, the loanos serve the purpose for us right now, right? So, but then for guys who don't know that trick, they've had to wait for licenses for years. And obviously, this is a pledge to regulators to probably fast track those applications. We've had to wait for ours for 1.5 years and probably will wait for an extra year. So that's the challenge we have right now. But then you can navigate that through working with licensed partners who, for example, Chembo is in Zambia. You can work with him. He's licensed in Zambia. Other players in different countries can help you with what you want to achieve in those specific countries because they are already licensed there. So you have to have a strategy around licensing to really make sure that that doesn't affect your growth. So that's how we approached it.
Very insightful. What do you think, Mr. Bamo?
So as a licensed payment operator, we are regulated by the central banks across the continent, and I think the regulators generally do a very good job at communicating the requirements, at working closely with the industry to make sure that we can succeed and we can continue to build the financial innovation that powers this digital revolution that we keep hearing about, that our friends from M-Pesa was highlighting earlier as well. So ironically for me, the threat is not really coming from our regulators. The real threat for our operations comes from other regulators. So I won't mention the country, but recently, to illustrate my point, a regulator in one of the countries where we operate gave out a directive that said that all betting companies had to use one payment provider. Overnight, the entire fintech industry in this country was destroyed. The entire fintech industry is in complete chaos in this country. The telcos that they work closely with, the mobile money operators that they work closely with, simply gave them notice and shut off their businesses overnight. That's a real threat. And to illustrate this point, so maybe you can understand, because some of you might think, well, it's just one industry, there are so many other industries. The payments industry work on extremely thin margins. You can maybe make 0.5% or 1% of the transaction volume that you process. So if you think of like, oh, what about e-commerce? If you run an e-commerce site in Cameroon that processes $100,000 of volume a month, that is an enormous e-commerce site in Cameroon. There are not 100 of those. It's an enormous site. That customer, as a payments operator, you make $500 from. They're simply the only industry that has the real volume to drive the revenues that allows the fintechs that are also here on this stage to build the products that serve the wider economy comes from betting. So the threat that we see is not actually coming from our regulator, it's coming from the regulators that we're here trying to have open conversations with, try to alert of the risks of if you put regulation in your industry, which we understand why you think is important, that has very severe effects on our industry. There's a reason why the payment industry is here at this conference as well. We're here because we are highly dependent on your industry to be able to do what we do well. And I think we also serve your industry very well. We build products that have helped the payments industry grow, and the threat that we see is thus not from our regulator, it's actually from the betting regulators.
We have another regulator here. You're going to defend yourself?
A very interesting point indeed. And I think, again, going back to the point I made yesterday, that as institution of government, that as we regulate, but also we generate revenue for government, but we've got to have a government that also sees the industry not only for purpose of just generating revenue, but as a critical partner in terms of as gambling as an economy, you know, so that if we do that, and then the regulatory framework enables, you know, players such as your fintech, such as your operators or your manufacturers, that are able to, you know, to contribute towards that revenue generation. You know, again, for example, I'll make an example again about an issue in South Africa, wherein you have FinServ, which is financial surveillance within your South African revenue services. That you know, there was a court case against them, wherein I think Standard Bank, you know, had an issue about one company that you know, they wanted to seize their assets, but unfortunately, FinServ, you know, there was an issue around that. So again, it's institution of government, but one thing is done on the other side, the other thing, you know. So we've got to have that synergy, everything move because it's one government, so that we can then be able to have the players. Because I can tell you, private sector contributes a lot in terms of the what do you call it, the GDP of the country. So I agree fully that we must not only focus on what we are doing, we must look at what we are doing as we develop those regulations, how do they impact on the other players as well.
Thank you very much. For Apollo, I want you to answer this question, but also quite specifically towards what you're doing, because I understand in crypto and virtual assets, there are many, many markets that really are not as much structured. So how are you handling that?
Thank you for the question. If you're asking if the business have been affected by regulation, yes. I began in 2019, and by 2020 I was out of business. Why? Because the bank was saying that the central bank has given a circular that you should not process any cryptocurrency. Back then, we had an app which was doing on and off ramp. So from M-Pesa, you could get your crypto, and from crypto, you could get your M-Pesa. The first guys to shut us down was M-Pesa. Our pay bill went away. But then, as business, if you do not pivot or change the way of doing business, you're out. So we've changed a lot of things since back then. We stopped offering B2C services because that's where there's a lot of issues. We are focusing more and more on stablecoins, which is pegged one-to-one to, you know, currencies like US dollar. So the other day, there's another one pegged to Kenya shillings. And in this area, there is not so much regulation right now, but there's a lot more clarity. So countries like South Africa and Nigeria right now, as a business, you can get a license. And we are working with those companies which are licensed in those countries. In Kenya, I think the bill is going to Parliament after the finance bill. I've been following very, very keenly. And the moment it's out, we're going to apply for that license. But then if you're dealing with businesses and you have the right partnerships and you're able to explain your case, it becomes much, much more easier to be able to penetrate. But then the key here is to be open about what you're doing, because I've even personally had so many challenges as a result of, you know, doing business in crypto, because sometimes there are clients who do not want to transact with you in an official way. They want to transact with you as an individual. And those volumes can really give you a lot of trouble, you know, in your personal M-Pesa, your personal bank account. So I would say regulation will always change, evolve. And for us who are in this industry and trying to push the boundaries, you're always going to innovate and use the latest technology because you're talking about cutting costs. Stablecoin can be sent just anywhere, anytime. It will arrive there like almost instantly. You can do that with M-Pesa, you can do that with bank or any other channel. And more businesses are embracing that because there's like no shortage of supply of USDT or USDC as opposed to if you go to a bank today and you want $1 million worth of US dollar notes, chances are you won't even get it.
All right.
Stablecoins just free for all and anyone can get access to it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Chembo, I will want you to comment on this, but also think about it. And is it just on the current regulatory framework, or also stability in terms of how soon these things keep changing?
Yeah, thank you. Actually, I was going to say that Nikolai has addressed the issue for PSPs quite well, so I wasn't going to dwell on that. I was going to basically add my 2 cents to Nikolai's submission, which is that I think the primary reason that he's in so many markets is he's serving clients that are in those multiple markets. And usually once you develop those relationships with a PSP and a gaming company, they would want to basically replicate that relationship in other markets. So as PSPs, we're now forced to try and fight for those other markets. Yes, we have relationships that we build with other PSPs, but as he said again, our margins are very, very low. So if we go into a new market, it means that we're now splitting that 0.5% with another player, which drastically also reduces our margins as well. So from a payments regulatory point of view, what my ideal vision would be blocks like probably like SADC or the East African communities, because the banking sector in those regions already are harmonized, would want to have no objections. If I have a license in one market and I come to a central bank, for example, in Zimbabwe, and they belong to SADC, they must give me a no objection because they are basically running on similar standards across that SADC region. I think that's my contribution.
Okay.
Yes, yeah, I want to share that obviously blockchain and crypto is not only about payments, that obviously is the first approach, but also it's about new ways to exchange value. And for example, as you know, there are new crypto casinos that the Z generations like it, and there are different kinds of rewarding that they like. No? So in terms of regulation, if we don't allow the innovation, so we are creating illegal markets. That's what happened in Western countries now. We call hyper-regulation. So regulation is good, is needed, that's no problem. But for example, in terms of products, we need freedom, no? And as a solution for that, obviously there is the self-regulation, because, for example, in terms of marketing in some countries, there is an association, for example, with media, with companies, with marketing agencies, that you submit a TV commercial and the organization says if it's okay or not, but not the regulator with different point of view. No? So I think if we don't allow innovation, the players, they go whatever is possible, and normally the illegal markets, and we are not interested in that. Okay.
Thank you very much. Another question, I think this is going to be quite a little sensitive because and this is on specifically payments in relations to gaming and player protection. Do you have a role in that? Do you, as payment providers for big gaming companies, do you have a role in trying to protect the users from, let's say, whatever they say, player protection? Do you have any role in that?
I'm smiling because I've made some notes down here about the risk management, because our role as regulators is to protect the public, right? Now, you would have heard South Africa being grey listed by FATF, FATF meaning that the Financial Action Task Force. We have our Financial Intelligence Center, which deals with the issues of money laundering and the like, and the terror financing. Now, you would have heard again in South Africa, there was something that was called, I think, Triple M or something. People know they were trading there, and people lost their money because that thing just vanished. Now, as government, you've got to protect the people. But now I want to pose now, what do you call it, a challenge to the payment service providers to say, how do they make sure that they assist us as regulators to ensure the regulation in relation to anti-money laundering, your terror financing, there's compliance in that. And then also the elements of fraud, how do we deal with that? Because remember, if we're not able to, get comfort from them to say there's issues of, consumer protection and data privacy, because there's a lot of data that get to be obtained, processed, and then transmitted with your systems. But for us, we're not here just to say we're going to block you, but we want to work with you. How do we then make sure that as we innovate, we are ethical, we are responsible? Because at the end of the day, as I always say, in fact, yesterday again, I've spoken about the PRO, that is the public. If you don't protect the public or the consumers, you will not have consumers tomorrow. So that's why it's so important. So I'm really interested to hear what they're going to say.
Mr. Bamwe.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously we have a role. I think everyone who plays in this industry has some kind of responsibility for ensuring responsible behavior for the actors involved. Luckily, our industry is extremely data-driven. Every single transaction is logged and audited. Every single transaction is fully auditable throughout the entire chain. You know the MSISDN from each transaction that goes through, so you can match it up with the KYC. All that data is available, and I know all the payment providers, at least all the compliant and licensed ones that are just like the betting operators paying their taxes and investing into compliance. We're all more than happy to work with regulators and share this information. We share it all with the operators, make sure that all the data on all the payment flows is completely available, so together we can ensure that there is a responsible gaming environment to do. I think that the danger becomes when you limit that scope through government monopolies, you create artificial restrictions in the economy that force operators and players into the black market. So in all cases where monopolies are introduced, you see a flourishing of black market. So we have a responsibility, but we can only carry that responsibility if we can participate in the market. So if you lock out licensed payments providers, they can't act responsibly.
I actually love what Nikolai said. So, first of all, the role of a company, a private company, is to deliver value for its shareholders, right? And stakeholders, right? So that involves investors, customers, and even partners that you're working with, right? So, in as much as we'd want to look at it from a moral perspective, we have to ride on the backs of regulators, right? So, for example, case in point, if we decide to create thresholds to which an individual can maybe use to gamble per month, right? We say everybody can only gamble a maximum of $1,000, right? That's a good threshold, right? From a moral perspective, that's a good threshold, right? But then from a business perspective, as he had said, we operate on small margins. We have to be directed by the regulator, first of all, to even want to implement that. I'm speaking this from a business perspective, right? So I think regulation has to take the lead before, us as fintech operators can follow and then implement that, right? Yeah.
What do you think, Paul?
Yeah, thank you, Sylvester. It's a tricky question because as a business, you want to maximize your profits. And I'll give you an example. If you're selling coffins and people are not dying, you're not in business, right? So if you are in the gambling business and people are not gambling irresponsibly, it means your margins are low, right? So it's tricky balance. But I think as it's been said, the regulator has a very big role to play here because it all comes down to education. there can be responsible online gaming. There can be responsible gambling. But how we get there, and the role of payment service providers, it's a little bit tricky and not divine. Because, for instance, I don't do last mile delivery. I only deal with businesses, so I don't get exposure to the actual gambling and betting individuals. But then at our level, we make sure that money that is incoming and outgoing, the business is well KYC'd, incoming, outgoing transaction is well monitored, is it coming from a fraudulent source and all that, just to make sure that, the payment system, doesn't get into any trouble, but that's just to protect us. So our role in trying to protect the last mile consumer, I would say the regulator has to play a very big role there. And then the last mile payment service provider has to also come in with a layer of education to just make sure that there's responsibility, but also deliver value to their shareholders, as it says. Yeah.
All right.
Thank you. So in terms of the role that payment service providers would play in securing their clients, in this case, like you said, it's a double-edged sword in that we try as much as possible to provide security in protocols that we have. We are regulated by central banks, as Nikolai pointed out. The central banks provide us with frameworks for reporting, anti-money laundering, cybersecurity protocols, and also interaction with our clients. We have a level of KYC, but remember, if we're acquiring on behalf of the betting company, the primary KYC is done by the betting company, which I believe also has similar protocols in terms of regulation. So we are primarily relying on the information coming over our API from our client and believing that it is secure. But just as an added layer, we'll use maybe two-factor authentication for the transaction in terms of maybe OTPs or facial recognition if it's an app that they are using to make that acquisition. So yes, we do provide as much as we can some level of protection, but obviously more needs to be done, because I think the person that spoke before we came on was giving us a talk over cybersecurity and what certain lapses are there. So it's an ongoing fight, to be honest. And I believe what would really help is some level of harmonization between the regulators in both markets, the gaming market and the financial services market, and also the gaming companies and the payment service providers. And if you remember my last point, I actually mentioned that most of the gaming companies, once they find the payment service provider, they would want to go with them into different markets. And this is one of the primary reasons. It's because you've built that trust between the two. So it's easier for you to basically speak the same language in multiple markets and provide that extra layer of security for your clients. Thank you.
All right. Very insightful.
Yes, obviously the payment industry can help a lot because they have all the data to help regulators or operators, and also with the help with AI as well, that to recognize these problematic patterns. But let me arise another critical point, that is, for me, data protections include also freedom and anonymity of the users. And now we have enough technology to do it, no? Until we do the KYC process, AML process, and we are sure that it's not a fake identity, it's not a terrorist or drug dealer, why we don't give the user some secret keys and he can play anonymously? We can also delete some records. So this is could be also a challenge, but I think interestingly, you go to a land-based casino, so you identify because you are not a minor, but until then, so they don't know what you have in the pocket, and you exchange with some chips. So we can do more or less the same. I think anonymity is a very important thing for financial freedom.
So can I just make a point?
Yes.
About I think there's a quite critical point to be made about responsible gaming and profitability, and I think it's a subtle point that's often lost. Who is the best customer for the betting company, and at the same extension the payments company? Who's the best customer? The best customer, the most profitable customer for a betting company is not someone who goes out and bets his entire salary in 1 week, loses everything, and goes bust and throws his life into chaos. That's not a good customer for the betting companies. That's not a profitable customer for the betting companies. The good and profitable customer for the betting companies is someone who responsibly gambles, spends a couple of dollars a month, the equivalent to 1 or 2 beers, but remains a loyal customer who responsibly uses betting as a source of entertainment for years. So responsible gaming and profitability are not two opposites. They're actually the same. So it's really important to understand that it's perfectly possible to be very profit-driven and try to maximize the value for the shareholders and put responsible gambling at the core of what you do, both for payments companies and betting operators.
A very, very, very amazing perspective. Well, we have talked a lot about the ills of regulations and all that and what happens trying to get to a new market, for example. But today I want to ask a question. Can any of you give me a very good story about a good market you have gone to and they have allowed you to grow, they have allowed your inventions to reach your customers and you have been able to have good turnaround? Any interesting thing you can tell us, especially for the African markets? Any of you?
I mean, I can happily give a number of examples there. So I think I mentioned before, so we operate in 20 different countries. We're licensed in and have regulatory cover in all the countries we operate. We have seen in most of these markets great success stories with going in with operators from other markets who want to enter the market, going in, providing a good service, building industries, creating local employment. And yeah, in most markets, it's been a really pleasant journey to go and meet the regulators in those markets and build out the business and bring in technology and skills and know-how and investment from abroad into the local economies.
Very nice. Mr. Paulo, any markets you've gone to and you've loved?
The market that I love the most is the one that makes me the most money. And that is Tanzania. Tanzania, I think I've had a very easy time with the regulated operators there. We've had some very good conversations and even partnerships. And I have multiple of them. So, if you have 3, 4, 5 rails and you're able to channel each and every client depending on their needs in each and every rail, then you're a happy person. But then when it comes to regulation, especially to do with crypto, stable coins, things are still evolving and they're a little bit slower in Tanzania. But then it's an economy to watch in East Africa because it's growing fast and the opportunities are just, bigger every day. Yeah.
All right. The reason I asked this question, by the way, is that we may have people in the audience here who are doing what you are doing, and they will also want to not go through what you went through for you to get here. So we are trying to also make their journey a little easier. So understanding markets in Africa, by the way, is something that is key. And it's good that through such summits, you're able to meet people who have good understanding of some of those jurisdictions, like Mr. Bamuel here, who says he's already in 20 countries, for example. You will be able to interact and ask, how did this happen? And maybe you will not go through the same problems that the others went to. Finally, I just have one question. What are you people working on for us to expect, not just for this industry? What are the great things you're cooking and what should we expect? Because we are talking about emerging technologies now, and you are the leaders in this ecosystem. Can you give us just a snippet of what are we expecting from you in terms of markets, in terms of products, in terms of partnerships? Do you have anything interesting we should look out for? Anyone can pick up.
What we're working on as Bitlipa is the future of how assets are distributed, acquired, and also transferred. So currently, the best place where you can go and raise funds if you're a very big business is the stock market. There is a concept called tokenization. It means you take real-world assets like a chair, and you're able to attach value to it and break it down into smaller pieces, which look like shares. And then these shares can be traded, sent forth, between people. So we are building towards that because I believe that in the next 5 to 10 years, so much asset will move on chain, be it land, even if you're in transport and logistics, you can be able to put your trucks and tokenize them so that, a value of one truck, you're not just paying money to buy the entire truck on your own, but you can be able to fundraise or just ask people to buy different parts of that truck. One person will buy the door, the other person will buy the window, but through this, you're raising money. So this is a trend that is gaining momentum, and we are building towards that. The other area that we're looking at is liquidity. Cross-border payment requires a lot of transactional liquidity for these companies and businesses. It's a challenge that we currently face. A client asks you to settle, say, $5 million in Tanzania or in Congo. That liquidity just can't find it instantly. So as a challenge that we are facing, we're also building towards that. Thank you.
I'm totally agree what you said. So I think tokenization, blockchain, ecosystems is coming, is happening now in the most crypto casinos. This is one of the trends. And the other one, I think, is the community games, but also the stuff of streamers and tipsters. I think this is very popular, especially in the generation. So this is becoming more and more important, no? But at the end, back to the basics, I think it's always the same, no? We are here, operators, suppliers, regulators, consultants, but there are no the players. And the players is the center of this industry, and we don't give to the player what they want. So we stop the innovation, they go to the illegal markets, etc. So I think it's very important to preserve that in the coming years.
Thank you. How about you, Mr. Chembo?
Thank you. So primarily Zoic's direction is to become the last mile access point for the SADC region. We are trying to foster cross-border payments and cross-border transactions in the SADC region seamlessly. And that's why for us, as I mentioned, being able to be licensed in that region very easily would help us deliver that product. So far, we've managed to be active in about 4 countries. Through our unified wallet and a single API, you can basically pay in and pay out in those markets very, very easily and very securely. So that's the direction that we're primarily going to.
Thank you very much. How are you, Mr. Ngwenyi?
So for us, we are really focusing on, the strategy we have when it comes to rolling out new products or new innovations is ITR, investment time return, right? We should be able to buy back a lot of time from our operations and also get good returns on those investments that we've made, right? So we are doubling down on payment services for emerging markets. We are launching in 1 or 2 months the Africa-China corridor, which is a huge corridor. We are also positioning ourselves as a major global liquidity provider for major businesses and even fellow fintech players, right? So this is something we want to double down on, and that's what we are focusing on. Thank you.
Good luck. Mr. Vamo?
I think the most exciting thing that we're working on right now is the monitoring tools. So we're using the experience and the data that we have built up as Africa's largest payment company to help betting regulators understand the payments transactions in their countries. And we're working with regulators across the continent now to implement monitoring tools that, without destroying the competitive market, allows the regulators to understand where the tax evasion is coming from. Because it's one of the big problems for the betting regulators is that, frankly, a lot of people are cheating and are not paying their taxes. So I'm very excited about using our experience and our product to help the regulators remove that and increase taxes without destroying the competition.
Interesting.
That's a very good point, and I think that's what I wanted to say as my last remarks. To say, as regulators, we are trying or fighting illegal gambling, and the illegal gambling is enabled by the banking sector or the payment service providers because they are paying through these systems or through these providers, and I think they are the key partner to assist us in fighting the illegal gambling. Because if they will not be able to process payments, then there will not be operations. So I like that point. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I didn't tell you that the remarks you're making were actually your last remarks because I wanted you to pitch your businesses as your last statements. Thank you very much. I appreciate your presence here, and I hope to see you again in GTSA next year. Probably we will come to your countries. Thank you very much.